Chasidus on the Parsha for Parshas Bereshis. Today we'll be looking at a piece from the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, which is the first Hasidic piece work ever made. And in verse 16, he quotes Vayas Elokim es shnei ha'marot hagadolim ve'esam or hagadol l'mshelas hayom ve'esam or hakaton l'mshelas halayla ve'yisukol kavim. Elokim made the two great lights, the large light to rule the day and the small light to rule the night and the stars. So there's a very famous Medrash and Gemara. Actually, we'll be focusing more on the Gemara's version of it, which is in Masechtas Chulin, on this verse. And just so you should know that you're going to hear some things that sound kind of anthropomorphic. Just know that when the rabbis speak in these anthropomorphic terminologies, that they're conveying to us very profound concepts that go beyond the literal meaning of what you're reading. So don't be overly disturbed by the anthropomorphisms. So they tell us that originally that the sun and the moon were created of equal size. But then the moon spoke up to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and said, Hashem, is it really cool or right that two kings use the same crown? Meaning you created, seeming this is how the day schools teach this, that really you created a sun and a moon of equal size. One should be bigger. One should really have the crown on its head, so to speak. And so Hashem said, oh yeah, you know what? You're right. So I'm going to make you smaller since you suggested it. That is how most day schools and people learn it. And there's some truth in that explanation. Now, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, he wants to examine this Gemara in more depth. And he wants to also look at it, if you look at the explicit wording of the Medrash. The wording of the Medrash does not say, I'm going to make you smaller. That's not exactly what it says. In fact, I brought it onto the screen now. It says, Lechi umisati atzmecha. Go, which I would translate like this, go and diminish yourself. So one way of possibly understanding what the Toldos says this means is that really the sun and moon were originally created of different size. One was big, one was small. But the moon never noticed that it was smaller than the sun. So perhaps the moon was like, well, I provide light during the night, and the night is like 12 hours, and he provides light during the day, and that's 12 hours. So we're equal. We must be of equal size and equal purpose. Who never realized that he was smaller than the sun. And not only that, he didn't ever realize that his whole light comes only by the virtue of the sun. What Hashem tells him is, you go and do some introspection. I know you've never done this introspection. You go and do some introspection and see if you are really the one who should be worthy of the major crown. Because when you look at yourself, you'll notice that you're actually a lot smaller than the moon and that you do not provide any light independent you're a lot smaller than the sun and you do not actually provide any light independent of the sun. So then the Toldos says, well, how can one ever say that the moon was ever considered a major light? Because the verse does say at one point, right, it calls them the Moros Gadolim, and only after the moon complained is the moon referred to as small. So at one point it was referred to as large. So the Toldos says that's correct. When the moon was willingly working in tandem with the sun, it was considered like the tail of a lion. So granted, a tail of a lion is still the tail, but it's still attached to the lion, and it's still part of the lion, and it's still called the lion, right? So when the moon was working in tandem with the sun and didn't make any complaints, it still deserved to be attached, so to speak, to the sun and deserved to be called the great luminary. It's only when it makes these observations and says, hey, we shouldn't have an equal crown, then it separates itself, and then it's like cutting off a tail from a lion. So now all you have is a tail, which is like worthless. But a little tail, which is worthless, but when attached to a lion, becomes part of a lion. It is the lion. All of that's nice, and that's a very interesting pshat on the Medrash and the Gemara. However, the Toldos Yaakov Yosef, being the first Hasidic work ever printed, teaches us many great klalim, rules of Chasidus. And one of the big rules of Chasidus is that everything that's written in the Torah is just as applicable today as it was when it was stated or happened. So what lesson am I supposed to learn from this interesting dialogue between the moon and God and the sun? What ramifications does that have in our world today? What am I supposed to internalize? So what he says is that this is an analogy for the way Hashem runs the world when it comes to the tzaddikim and Talmidei Chachamim, the great high-level people and people who know a lot of Torah, and the wealthy balabatim, the rich people in the community. You see, the whole world is sustained in the merit of the tzaddikim and the Talmidei Chachamim. And all bracha, all blessings and parnasa and income that comes to the world is channeled through the tzaddikim, the holy righteous people. So what Hashem does is he says, okay, I have such and such amount of holy people in the world, and because of their righteousness, I'm going to sustain the whole world and themselves. But I don't just throw all that money to the tzaddik. Usually tzaddikim and Talmidei Chachamim are usually not very wealthy at all. So what he does is he finds somebody who's not a Talmid Chacham per se, or tzaddik, and usually that's how it works. I mean, there are exceptions to the rules, but usually that's how it works. And he finds somebody who can't necessarily sit and learn Torah 15 hours a day. But you know what that person can do? They can look at stocks 15 hours a day. They can look at real estate 15 hours a day. And Hashem makes them successful in the stocks that they buy and the real estate that they buy. And Hashem wants those people to be connected to the tzaddikim, because he knows that every single person has a different nature. So he gives them an opportunity. He makes them wealthy so that they have money left over to feed the rich, feed the tzaddikim and the Talmidei Chachamim, the Torah scholars and the teachers of the community. He makes them rich so that they can do that. So they become as if they're in partnership with the tzaddikim. They become like they're in partnership with the Talmidei Chachamim. So those rich people, are like the moon, and the tzaddikim and the Talmidei Chachamim, they're like the sun. And when they give money to the rabbis and the Talmidei Chachamim, they become joint with them, and they merit themselves to be called great luminaries. But unfortunately, many times, the rich person thinks he got his wealth through his own skills. I know how to pick them well. I knew that property would flip. Or their own merit, where they think that because they're so righteous, that's why they got wealthy. But that's completely wrong. They're making the exact same mistake that the moon made. So it is incumbent upon them, when they start to get these thoughts in their minds, to learn from the moon and go and diminish themselves. Look at themselves in the mirror and realize that that wealth only came so that you could support that rabbi that lives 3,000 miles away in Israel. Let this be a lesson to us, that we should all merit to attach ourselves to the tzaddikim and become worthy of being called great luminaries ourselves through being attached to the tzaddikim. Have a great Shabbos.